Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
May we please call Miss Cortes-Martin?
Yes.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Could you confirm your full name, please, Miss Cortes-Martin?
It's Belinda Jane Cortes-Martin.
Thank you for coming to the inquiry to assist it with its work and for providing the statement that you have. As you know, my name is Emma Price and I will be asking you questions on behalf of the inquiry.
Yes.
You should have a hard copy of your witness statement in front of you. Do you have that?
I do.
It is dated the 8th of April 2024. If you could turn to page 53 of that, please. Do you have a copy with a visible signature?
I do.
Is that your signature?
It is.
I understand that in light of documents recently disclosed to you, you have some corrections which you would like to make to your statement. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Would you like to tell us what those are?
In paragraph 9, line 1, change full-time to fixed term. Likewise, in paragraph 12, line 1, change full-time to fixed term. And likewise, in paragraph 42, line 2, change full-time to fixed term. In paragraph 24, after the final sentence, add in a new sentence which says, having reviewed the documents provided in the second bundle, specifically E42, which is POL 0034 9472, I can see I had previously raised what seems to be a similar point in October 2014, but I cannot recall whether or how this matter was addressed. And in paragraph 85, line 15, that's at the top of page 42, after understanding, add in, I see from POL 0002240 that I disagreed with the approach suggested by lawyers in the introduction and sought the views of General Counsel. And finally, in paragraph 60, line 4, after the word attending, insert one of and add an S to meetings. So the sentence should then read, I believe that this was the impression I came away with when attending one of my first steering group meetings for Project Sparrow.
Thank you. With those corrections made, are the contents of your statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
That statement, for which the reference is WITN 099-10100, is now in evidence and will be published on the inquiry's website in due course. I will not be asking you about every aspect of the statement, but instead taking you to some specific points which are addressed in it. I'd like to start, please, with your professional background and the roles which you held with the Post Office.
Yes.
I understand from your statement that you no longer have access to your CV, but can you help, please, with what qualifications you hold, including any degree?
I have an MVQ level 6 in strategic management and 2 A-levels and some O-levels. I can't quite remember how many.
You say at paragraph 4 of your statement that you were a civil servant for the majority of your working life.
I was.
So from 1979 to mid-2011, is that right?
That's correct.
And for the final 2 to 3 years, you were the Information Director for the Ministry of Justice. Can you help, please, with the type of roles you carried out as a civil servant prior to this?
A number of roles. I was a manager in the Disability Living Allowance Centre in Bristol, managing the throughput of disability living allowance claims. I think that was my last operational role, or strictly operational role in the civil service. I then moved into policy, and I worked on tribunals policy, reform of the tax appeals process. I was the bill manager for the gender recognition bill in, I don't remember the date, but sometime in 2006, 7, 8. Before I became Information Director, I was Head of Information Policy in the Ministry of Justice. There would be other roles in that, but I can't quite recall, and I certainly can't recall the order of them.
Of course. And what did your role as Information Director at the Ministry of Justice entail?
So it was anything to do with information policy and practice. So I was responsible for libraries, records management, data protection policy, freedom of information policy, freedom of information operations within the Ministry of Justice, sponsorship of the National Archive, sponsorship of the Office of the Information Commissioner. There may have been one or two other things that came within that, but I don't now recall.
After leaving the civil service, you became an independent consultant, is that right?
Yes.
And the majority of this work related to information security?
Yes.
You recall that it was in early 2012 when you were first asked to carry out work for the Post Office, is that right?
Yes.
And this followed an approach by the chair of the Post Office in late 2011?
Yes.
And was the chair at the time Alice Perkins?
It was, yes.
And you say you were asked to do work related to the government's proposals to mutualise the Post Office, is that right?
Yes.
You then had a meeting with Susan Crichton, General Counsel at the time, and Alwyn Lyons, Company Secretary, is that right?
Yes.
And you submitted a proposal for supporting the project, which was accepted?
Yes.
What did your role supporting the mutualisation project entail?
It began with helping to Post Office formulate its response to the government's proposals for mutualisation. I can't now recall whether or not, I think the government had issued its consultation document relating to proposals to mutualise Post Office. I don't think government had responded to the or issued a report into its consultation. I think I was helping, but Post Office had to respond to it, so I helped formulate that response, taking views from across Post Office. And then when government published its intentions on the back of its consultation, or the findings of its consultation, to work with the Post Office to look at how mutualisation could be given effect within the Post Office, specifically to run I think we called it a stakeholder forum, which was chaired by Paula Venables looking at the public purpose of the post office.
What were you told in 2012 when you were in that first post office role about the issues facing the post office at the time?
Do you mean specifically in relation to Horizon or more generally?
Were you given a briefing as to the priority issues for the post office at the time?
Not to the best of my recollection. The challenge that I recall facing the post office at the time was what I think was called its transformation programme. I don't remember the details of it, but I think I needed to be aware of that in the context of a mutualised post office.
Were you told anything at that time about challenges to the Horizon system?
Not as far as I recall.
Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 7 of Ms. Cortes-Martin's statement? That's page 3, please. You say in the first sentence here, in or around October 2013, I was asked to move and work within POL's complaint review and mediation scheme, hereinafter referred to as the scheme. Who was it who asked you to move and work within the scheme? Can you recall?
I don't recall specifically. I have assumed that Paula or somebody on Paula's behalf would have spoken to me about it. But I don't have a recollection of specifically being asked.
Were you interviewed for the role?
No.
You refer in this paragraph of your statement to an email from Paula Venables summarising the role that you took up in October 2013.
Yes.
Could we have that on the screen, please? It's POL 00116-179. And we can see that here this is from Sarah Paddison, but scrolling down, we can see it is in fact an email from Paula Venables, so sent on Paula Venables' behalf. And a little further up, please, just so we can see the date, 8th of October 2013. And the subject is Project Sparrow Steering Group. And we can see here that you had been asked to provide support to Project Sparrow in 3 ways. First, you had a secretariat role for the Complaint Review and Mediation Scheme Working Group. Is that right?
Yes.
Second, you had a role being the main channel of communication between the chair of the Scheme Working Group, so that was Sir Anthony Hooper, is that right?
That's correct.
And the business. And third, and the third bullet point here, you had a distinct role providing strategic support and advice to Paula Venables in her role as chair of the Project Sparrow Steering Group. And it's said to be across all of the Project Sparrow work streams, is that right?
Yes.
What did you understand Project Sparrow's role and objectives to be when you first took up these roles?
I think it's fair to say I wasn't sure. I would also say that looking at this email, I think it was a general, this is what I think the role will be, because the scheme had just started. But to the best of my recollection, the only paperwork I received was any paperwork that would have been sent out in advance of the steering group meeting, and I picked things up as I went along.
Did you understand at the time you took up these roles that your secretariat to the scheme working group role, in that role, the support you provided was to be provided independently of any other role you carried out for the post office?
Insofar, just to make sure that I'm clear about the question, it was definitely made clear to me that I should do what the chair asked of me and what the working group asked of me, and should not in any way diverge from that in order to serve a different purpose for the post office.
When you became involved in the scheme, did you see any difficulty at all with holding both the roles that you did, so on the scheme working group on the one hand and the Project Sparrow advisory role?
At the time, I didn't.
Is your answer different today?
Having reviewed the documents and understanding what I now understand of what has arisen subsequently, I feel some discomfort because I can see how it looks different. But at the time, I didn't feel any real tension, and I was never under any pressure from Post Office to in any way, to the best of my recollection, favour Post Office in terms of my support for the working group and the scheme. I would go further perhaps and say that that would have been actively discouraged, and that although most of the papers that I have been provided with, and indeed most of the questions I have been asked, relate to issues to do with the closure of the scheme and other things, actually the way that I spent, I wouldn't want to put a percentage on it right now after all this time, but I would say between 50 and 80% of my time was just spent running the scheme, supporting the chair and the working group.
Underneath the 3 bullet points in this email, we have this. Separately, Belinda will also be helping to coordinate a short internal lessons learned exercise on the process leading up to the publication of the second site report. We will discuss the approach to this in future steering groups, but in brief, the aim of the exercise will be to discuss collectively what insights the business can take from the experience. This is the interim second site report dated the 8th of July 2013 being referred to here, is it?
I assume so, yes.
What were you told at this stage about the process leading up to the publication of the second site report, the interim report?
Very little. In fact, it was a source of some confusion to me as to what I should be covering in the lessons learned. It became clear that there had been some tensions within Post Office about around this time. Those tensions, I think, had included a tension which included Susan Crichton, who left at the time I was becoming involved in this. So I do recall being very clear, because this wasn't something that I had understood at all, that I was not prepared to do an exercise in who was to blame for whatever problem Post Office seemed to want to address through the lessons learned. In terms of the information I was given, and I think when my report came out, it was more to do with Post Office's ability to set up a scheme at short notice, or to set up a project at short notice, and rather than anything to do with Second Sight's report itself.
What were you told about the reason for the Post Office's original instruction of Second Sight to conduct a review in relation to the Horizon IT system?
That a number of MPs had approached either Paula or Alice or both, expressing concerns about Horizon. I believe that particularly Alice, as a new chair, was keen to engage in this at an early stage of her chairship, and as a result of her discussions with MPs, agreed to undertake an investigation into Horizon.
That document can come down now, thank you. You say in your statement at paragraph 15 that you imagine you would have read the Second Sight interim report at some point after starting your work on the scheme.
Yes.
Given that you were being asked to conduct a lessons learned exercise on the process leading to the report, would it be right to assume that you would have read the report quite soon after taking up your role on the scheme?
So I see from the documents that have been provided to me that I actually officially started on the scheme on the 25th of November. But I was also provided with a document exchange which Paula had copied me into, talking about some cases that had been raised by Second Sight. And on the email exchange, I think I say, I don't think I've seen the report, or could somebody send me the report, please? And I think this was early-ish in October. The documents are in the bundle, I just don't recall.
Yes, we will be going to that document, in
Okay.
fact. The date on that document is October 2013.
Right.
So at October 2013, you don't think you had it, but presumably if you requested it, you would have been provided with it.
I'm
you
sure.
Recall being provided with it.
I'm sure that's the case.
By November 2013, you had been given the title of Programme Director of Project Sparrow. Is that right?
Yes.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 001 37758? This is a note of actions and decisions from the Project Sparrow Steering Group meeting on the 12th of November 2013. At the meeting were Paula Vennels, Chris Ojard, Mark Davies and Angela van den Bogert, among others, and you. And under point 4, please, we see this under roles and responsibilities. Project Sparrow should be split to separate the mediation scheme from business improvements. AVDB, so is that Angela van den Bogert?
Yes.
To be Programme Director for the Business Improvements Programme. BC, is that you?
Yes.
To be Programme Director for Sparrow. And there's an action there, AVDB and BC, to agree how the split will work with CA, so is that Chris Ojard?
Yes.
How did the split between you and Angela van den Bogert work?
So the business improvement programme was the response given to Angela for to be programme director, and everything else at the time, I don't know whether I fully understood what everything else was, but everything else would come to me. The caveat around that was the investigations into the specific complaints in the scheme would be conducted by a team, or actually 2 teams that were established by Angela. So although the investigations were relevant to the scheme itself, as opposed to almost being tangential to it, Angela had responsibility for the investigations and the cases, and I did not.
That document can come down now, thank you. You say at paragraph 8 of your statement that you completed your outstanding work on mutualisation between October and December 2013. Was that alongside your work on the scheme and Project Sparrow?
Yes. So I think, to the best of my recollection, Sir Anthony Hooper was appointed and was keen to have a working group meeting. So my secretariat responsibilities started relatively quickly. In terms of everything else, I would say as the process continued, it wasn't a straight cut-off point at the 25th of November. The mutualisation work ran down and the mediation work ramped up.
And what became of the proposal for mutualisation?
So at that stage in the process, it was split between the Communications Directorate looking at the public purpose of the Post Office, which would have been an underlying statement of what the Post Office stood for, and then the strategy to mutualise the Post Office stayed with Strategy Group, where it had sat when I was working on it.
You then started a fixed-term contract which made you an employee of the Post Office, is that right?
That's correct.
And that was on the 1st of January 2014?
Yes.
You've corrected in your statement the reference to full-time to fixed-term.
Yes.
Were you working full-time hours?
Yes.
You say at paragraph 11 of your statement that you also provided a support function for the new Post Office General Counsel, Chris Ojard. What did this role entail?
So this was specifically to assist him in meeting any requests from either the working group or the board in the general area of work which fell into not necessarily a direct result of the mediation scheme, but any issues that the particularly the Post Office Board wanted to address in order to inform any decisions they wanted to make to the scheme. It was a pulling together of anything that he needed pulling together that was in any way related to matters relating to the scheme.
Is it right that your fixed-term contract with the Post Office ran until the 31st of March 2015?
That's correct.
At which point you retired?
Yes.
I'd like to turn, please, to your knowledge of bugs, errors and defects and your understanding of their significance. Not now, but at the time that you were at the Post Office.
Yes.
At paragraph 15 of your statement, you say that you were not aware of the abbreviation for bugs, errors and defects, that is BEDS, during your time within Post Office. You do recall, though, being aware of the matters raised in the interim second site report of July 2013.
Yes.
And you also say at that paragraph that you became aware of such issues being raised by the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, as well as applicants in the scheme.
Yes, not specifically related to bugs, but just concerns about the Horizon system.
Looking, please, to the interim second site report itself. Could we have that on screen, please? It's POL 30099063. We can see the title there, Interim Report into Alleged Problems with the Horizon System. And then going, please, to page 8. Towards the bottom, we have the date, the 8th of July, 2013, and the redacted signatures of Mr. Henderson and Mr. Warmington. And the preliminary conclusions are set out above at 8.2. And these were as follows. A, we have so far found no evidence of system-wide systemic problems with the Horizon software. B, we are aware of 2 incidents where defects or bugs in the Horizon software gave rise to 76 branches being affected by incorrect balances or transactions, which took some time to identify and correct. C, occasionally an unusual combination of events such as a power or communications failure during the processing of a transaction can give rise to a situation where timely, accurate and complete information about the status of a transaction is not immediately available to a sub-postmaster. D, when individual sub-postmasters experience or report problems, POL's response can appear to be unhelpful, unsympathetic or simply fail to solve the underlying problem. The lack of a user forum or similar facility means that sub-postmasters have little opportunity to raise issues of concern at an appropriate level within Post Office Limited. E, the lack of an effective outreach investigations function within POL results in POL failing to identify the root cause of problems and missing opportunities for process improvements. And F, the end of trading period processes can be problematic for individual sub-postmasters, particularly if they are dealing with unresolved transaction corrections. The lack of a suspense account option means that it is difficult for disputed transaction corrections to be dealt with in a neutral manner. Then going back, please, to paragraph 6.4 on page 5. This is under the section on whether defects in Horizon caused some of the losses for which sub-postmasters or their staff were blamed. And it says at 6.4, in the course of our extensive discussions with Post Office Limited over the last 12 months, Post Office Limited has disclosed to Second Sight that in 2011 and 2012, it discovered defects in Horizon Online that had impacted 76 branches. And over the page, please. The first defect, referred to as the receipts and payments mismatch problem, impacted 62 branches. It was discovered in September 2010 as a result of Fujitsu's monitoring of system events, although there were subsequent calls from branches. The aggregate of the discrepancies arising from this system defect was £9,029, the largest shortfall being £777, and the largest surplus, £7,044. Post Office Limited has informed us that all shortages were addressed at no loss to any sub-postmaster. Then the second defect is addressed at the next paragraph, the local suspense account problem, affecting 14 branches and generating discrepancies totalling £4,486, including a temporary shortfall of £9,800 at one branch and a surplus of £3,200 at another. The remaining 12 branches were all impacted by amounts of less than £161. Goes on to say that Post Office was unaware of this second defect until a year after its first occurrence in 2011, it reoccurred, and an unexplained shortfall was reported by a sub-postmaster. The initial investigations by the Post Office in 2012 failed to reveal the system defect, and because the cause could not be identified, the amount was written off. Fujitsu looked into the matter early in 2013 and discovered and then corrected the defect. It seems, however, that the shortfalls and surpluses that occurred in the first occurrence in 2011 resulted in branches being asked to make good incorrect amounts. Post Office Limited has informed us that it has disclosed in witness statements to English courts information about one other subsequently corrected defect or bug in the Horizon software. Forgive me for taking you through that at some length, but I'd just like to be clear about the issues that were being raised in the interim second site report.
Yes.
And the report was, in fact, making reference to 3 defects or bugs in total, which second site had been told about by the Post Office. Would you agree?
Yes.
You say at paragraph 15 of your statement that you were not aware of concerns being raised within the Post Office about bugs, errors or defects, or a lack of integrity in the system. But aren't these 3 defects or bugs identified by the Post Office to second site an example of that? Concerns being raised by the Post Office?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Forgive me, that was a long question. In your statement, you say, and if you'd like to go to it, we can. It's paragraph 15 of the statement. Which is page 6. I referred earlier to the sentence before this of becoming aware of such issues being raised by Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance and applicants in the scheme. And you say, I was not aware of concerns being raised within Post Office Limited about BEDs or bugs, errors or defects, or a lack of integrity in the Horizon system. What I'm asking is those defects or bugs which were referred to in the interim second site report, having been raised by the Post Office, were they not an example or examples of concerns being raised within Post Office about bugs, errors or defects?
I see. So at the time I became involved in this, it was my understanding that Post Office believed that it had addressed the issues raised in the second site report satisfactorily, and therefore, beyond that, it continued to have confidence that Horizon was working as it should. Therefore, and because these issues, these particular beds had been highlighted, publicised and addressed, my understanding within the Post Office was that almost there was a line drawn under that, but moving forward, there was a considerable level of confidence in the fact that Horizon was working as it should.
One of the preliminary conclusions that we've just been to was second site raising concern about the Post Office failing to identify the root causes of problems. In light of that, did you not have any concern that there might be other defects or bugs, using second site's terminology, that had not been discovered?
At the time, no.
That document can come down now, thank you. When you took up your role with the scheme and Project Sparrow in 2013, were you aware that the Post Office had brought prosecutions against sub-postmasters and others privately based on Horizon data?
I was aware that Post Office brought prosecutions. The detail of that, or more detail of how that worked, for example, that Post Office was not a prosecuting authority, it was private prosecutions, was something I became aware of a bit later. The actual evidence used in the prosecutions was not something that I was particularly aware of or particularly concerned myself with. It became the subject of discussions later during the lifetime of the scheme between Post Office and Second Sight.
Were you aware when you took up the roles in 2013 that action was being taken against sub-postmasters by the Post Office, including by way of civil claims and debt recovery actions, to recover shortfalls in agency branches?
I certainly became aware of that during the first couple of months, I would say.
When you read the interim Second Sight report, did you recognise the significance of it for individuals against whom the Post Office had taken action?
No. I read it by way of background in terms of what had gone before, as opposed to particularly engaging in the detail. The only detail I engaged in was subsequently in relation to, I think, was Spot Review 5. But beyond that, it was more by way of context for the work that I was involved in, as opposed to me being involved in any sort of investigation of the issues.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 00302417? This is an email from, if we can scroll down a little, Angela Tanner, Stakeholder Correspondence Team. Can you help us with that team? What was that team's role?
I think that was just the team that dealt with any lessons, any correspondence that came into Post Office generally.
And this was copied, this was sent to you, copied to Angela van den Bogert, along with one other. It is dated the 27th of February 2014. And it reads, "Hi Belinda, please find attached a letter sent to Paula regarding a Horizon integrity concern. I have spoken to Gail today and she has advised me that you are the person to help me. The letter is from Oliver Heald, QC MP, on behalf of Mrs. Jasvinda Barang, who was a sub-postmaster until her contract was terminated due to fraud. She believes that there was an issue with her Horizon system and would like her case to be considered under the mediation scheme. Both Oliver Head, MP, and the sub-postmistress are aware the closing date was the 18th of November. Not sure if this case can be looked into. Please advise what we can do." Do you recall this case being referred to you at all, given it was referred via an MP?
No.
Can you help with why you would have been the person to help?
Because it related to a potential late application to the scheme, and I was the secretariat to the scheme. At that point, the scheme had closed to new applicants, and I can't recall the point at which there might have been a change of process, but initially we did have some late applications to the scheme, and they came sometimes through correspondence to the post office, sometimes through correspondence to Second Sight. And my job as secretariat to the working group would be to put them on the agenda for the working group to make a decision as to whether or not the cases should be admitted. After a period of time, I think that the working group had decided that late applications should not be accepted, but the cases would be passed to Angela van den Boga to investigate as part of her business as usual processes. So the reason I explain that is I can't recall this case, and I don't know whether or not I would have put it as an agenda item for the working group, or by that time the working group would have decided that that it would be passed immediately to Angela.
So should we understand from that that you were not involved in any investigation of the facts of this case?
No.
Or that document can come down now, thank you. You have addressed the Helen Rose report in your statement at paragraphs 80 to 83. If you wish to refer to those paragraphs, do. And in particular, you have referred to email correspondence from April and June 2014, in which the report was addressed. Your evidence at paragraph 80 is that you think you believe you became aware of the Helen Rose report in 2014, but you do not think you appreciated at the time the extent to which the contents of it may have been important to sub-postmasters who had been convicted of relevant offences on the basis of Horizon data. Is that right?
I'm sorry, could you take me to the paragraph again?
Of course, it's paragraph 80.
80?
Yes. We can
Sorry, 80.
80. We can have that
I
up on the
apologise.
screen. It's page 39.
Yes. Yes.
So you say, I believe that I became aware of the Helen Rose report at some point in 2014, although I do not recall exactly when. Following my review of the report and the email correspondence around the matter, I do not think that I appreciated at the time the extent to which the contents of it may have been important to those sub-postmasters who had been convicted of theft, a fraud offence or false accounting on the basis of data generated by the Horizon IT system. Could we have on screen, please, POL 001 48049? And page 3 of this document, please. About halfway down the page is an email from Steve Darlington of Howe & Co. to Ron Warmington, dated the 8th of April, 2014. And the first 2 paragraphs of his email read as follows. As Pretty has stated in her last sentence, we are seeking a stay on the time limits on all cases under review due to the implications of Post Office Limited's non-disclosure of system-generated transactions and Horizon's integrity issues. The Helen Rose report is of critical significance to all cases. The information contained within it is a compelling case for such a stay in its own right. When combined with the Andy Wynne/Alan Lusher email in the case of Ward, which explicitly states that Fujitsu can remotely change the figures in the branches without the sub-postmaster's knowledge or authority, the case for a general stay is overwhelming. We will come back to the second point being raised here, and that being the point of the case of Ward and the email referred to. But sticking now with the Helen Rose report.
Yes.
Scrolling up to the email above, please, we can see here Mr. Warmington forwarding Mr. Darlington's email to you, proposing this for that week's working group call. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then scrolling up again, we see that you forward the email from Mr. Warmington onto Angela Vanden Bogert, Andrew Parsons, Andy Holt, and Roderick Williams, also on the 8th of April 2014. And that email was copied to Chris Ojard and David Oliver. And you say this: please see below, not yet decided about whether to postpone this week's WG call, but does anyone know anything about the email being quoted below about remote alteration of the figures in branch? I think this one is new on me. As I say, we'll come back to that. Andy P, can we please chase CK, so Cartwright King, was that?
Yes.
For a response on the Rose report point. Do you recall this coming to your attention in this way, the Rose report reference, looking at these documents?
From reading these documents, I assume that the issue of the Rose report had arisen previously, and I had asked Andy Parsons for presumably some briefing to ensure that Chris Ojard and Angela had what they would require for any discussion at the working group.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 30297707? This is an email later on the 8th of April 2014 from Andrew Parsons to you, among others, providing some information, having spoken to Cartwright King. And he addresses an issue in his email relating to redactions applied to the report before providing some background information in his penultimate paragraph on the Helen Rose report. And he says this: just for background information, the material part of the Helen Rose report has nothing to do with her comments about reversal data. SS, is that second site?
Yes.
And Howe, being Howe & Co., are taking this point as evidence of a problem with the integrity of Horizon. In fact, Helen's issue was that the credence data, although accurate, did not on its face clearly distinguish between automated reversals and user-generated reversals. This information is available but in a different report. The concern was not with the data's accuracy, but that the presentation of the data could be misleading if its limitation were not fully understood. Putting this issue aside, the real, and in brackets, and confidential reason that the report was disclosed was because Helen's comment at the bottom of page 3 suggests that it was widely known that there were problems with Horizon. This statement, brackets, regardless of whether it is correct, could have been used to attack Gareth Jenkins' credibility as Post Office Limited's Horizon expert, as he had previously stated that there were no problems with Horizon. So Mr. Parsons is flagging up, is he not, that the Helen Rose report had implications for the credibility of Gareth Jenkins?
He is, and I can now see that. At the time, that is not the way that I would have read this email, to the extent with which I would have engaged with the detail.
At the time, did it concern you at all, that particular aspect in relation to Gareth Jenkins' evidence?
No.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 00202810? This is an email from Andrew Parsons to you dated the 9th of April 2014, so the next day. I appreciate this is a document which has only been provided to you very recently. Have you had a chance to read through it, or do you want to take a moment to just read through now?
No, that's fine.
It reads as follows: Andrew Parsons to you, copied to David Oliver. Belinda, FYI below and attached. This is the original Helen Rose report and the original email chain. I can't find anything after this date in our records, as I think that Roderick took over from this point. Clearly, at some point, this document went to Cartwright King, and Cartwright King produced the attached advice in July 2013 that triggered the disclosures of the report to some convicted sub-postmasters. There are two attachments to the email that we can see just under the subject there. You can see attachments: Horizon Data Lepton SPSO confidential doc. And then the second one, Gareth Jenkins advice, 5th of July 2013. And that second one is the Simon Clark advice, Simon Clark of Cartwright King, on the use of expert evidence relating to the integrity of the Fujitsu Services Limited Horizon system. Did you read the Rose report itself when it was sent to you by Mr. Parsons?
I don't recall whether or not that was the point I read the Rose report, but from the previous, or from a previous email, I can see that I did read it because I queried some things in it and suggested that Chris needed briefing on it. But whether or not it was in response to the attachment to this, I don't know.
Did you read the Simon Clark advice of the 15th of July 2013 when it was sent to you in this email?
I have absolutely no recollection of that advice. I am quite surprised to see that here, because up until this point, I would have said I had no knowledge of it whatsoever.
You say you have no recollection of the advice. Would you have read the attachments to emails sent to you as a general practice?
So I think it depends on the context. So I would have considered my role to make sure that anybody that needed to know about anything in order to ensure that the work of the working group went smoothly and that they were properly briefed. So I commissioned briefing. I did not read everything that was sent to me. I suspect, because I have now read the Clark advice, because it's been published in various formats, I suspect I might have opened it and started to read it, but not read all of it. I think it's quite long, and I certainly wouldn't have understood the significance of it, particularly in view of the fact that I believed that that Post Office had done everything it needed to assure itself that its prosecutions were safe. So this is something about which I would not have concerned myself, and I would have assumed that it was being dealt with by the criminal lawyers who were experts in the area. But I don't think I read it.
Did you ask anyone about the advice at all
Um,
at the time about what it was about?
I have no recollection at all.
Mr. Ojard's evidence was that he was aware of the Clarke advice. Did he ever raise it with you?
No, to the best of my knowledge, no.
Could we have the Clarke advice on screen, please? It's POL 406357. And going, please, to the last page, page 14. At the bottom, we can see the date and the author. You say that you have now seen the advice. Have you read it from start to finish now?
Pretty much, yes.
I'd like to take you, please, to paragraph 36. That's page 12. And without reading it all out, if you can just cast your eye down there. We see there at E the reference to Helen Rose's comment in her report. And so this is Simon Clarke explaining the significance of the comment.
Yes.
Reinforcing the point. I know you are aware of all the horizon integrity issues. And then at G, no mention is made of any of these horizon issues, those issues you see set out above in Dr. Jennings' expert witness statements considered in this review. Rather, the statements attest to the robustness and integrity of horizon. Then at paragraph 38, apologies, at H at the top there, had the existence of the bugs been disclosed by Dr. Jennings in his expert witness statements, then in relation to any defendant who had raised horizon issues as part of her defence case, that material might reasonably be considered capable of undermining the case for the prosecution or of assisting the case for the accused, and would undoubtedly have required disclosure to such a defendant. Then at paragraph 38, at 37 above, Mr. Clarke makes clear that Dr. Jennings has not complied with his duties to the court, the prosecution or the defence. And at 38, the reasons as to why he failed to comply with this duty are beyond the scope of this review. The effects of that failure, however, must be considered. And he advised the following to be the position. Dr. Jenkins failed to disclose material known to him but which undermines his expert opinion. This failure is in plain breach of his duty as an expert witness. Accordingly, Dr. Jenkins' credibility as an expert witness is fatally undermined. He should not be asked to provide expert evidence in any current or future prosecution. Similarly, in those current and ongoing cases where Dr. Jenkins has provided an expert witness statement, he should not be called upon to give that evidence. Rather, we should seek a different independent expert to fulfill that role. Notwithstanding that the failure is that of Dr. Jenkins and arguably of Fujitsu Service Limited being his employer, this failure has a profound effect upon Post Office Limited and Post Office Limited prosecutions, not least because by reason of Dr. Jenkins' failure, material which should have been disclosed to defendants was not disclosed, thereby placing Post Office Limited in breach of their duty as a prosecutor. By reason of that failure to disclose, there are a number of now convicted defendants to whom the existence of bugs should have been disclosed but was not. Those defendants remain entitled to have disclosure of that material, notwithstanding their now convicted status. And he goes on to explain he's already advised on the need to conduct a review of all post office prosecutions so as to identify those who ought to have had the material disclosed to them. That review is presently underway. Further, there are also a number of cases where there has been no disclosure where there ought to have been. Here we must disclose the existence of the bugs to those defendants where the test for disclosure is met. Where a convicted defendant or his lawyers consider that the failure to disclose the material reveals an arguable ground of appeal, he may seek the leave of the Court of Appeal to challenge his conviction. And at 39, in an appropriate case, the Court of Appeal will consider whether or not any conviction is unsafe. In doing so, they may well inquire into the reasons for Dr. Jenkins' failure to refer to the existence of bugs in his expert witness statements and evidence. Were you aware of the issues set out in the paragraphs that we've just been to at the time?
No. I have to assume that I did not read it because, and again, having looked at it with you here, even my lack of legal knowledge or lack of knowledge of criminal law would not have stopped me, I think, from at least asking what has happened in relation to this. So I must assume I didn't read it. I would, and I struggle to understand why Andy would have sent it to me, because disclosures and matters relating to disclosures was totally outside of my brief.
Had you read it at the time, what would your reaction have been?
Now?
Had you read it at the time?
Oh, had it? So, I would have questioned, I'm sure, of Andy, Jarnell certainly, and I would also have asked the question of Chris that what had happened as a result of this. I would say that I took most things that were not within my direct line of responsibility at face value in terms of what I was told. The reason I make that point is that particularly not having any familiarity with the subject matter, and in a big organisation, doing the job I was doing and also others, I was incredibly reliant on the completeness, the accuracy and the veracity of the information I was given. The reason I don't believe that I saw this is that I did continue to insert into briefing comments about Post Office's confidence in the safety of its its prosecutions. And I can't imagine that I would have done so had I read this, at least without having asked a question about it.
Going back to the email traffic on the subject of the Helen Rose report, please, and how it was to be referred to in investigation reports for the scheme. Could we have on screen, please, POL 001 29392? Towards the bottom of page 2, please. This is an email from Andrew Parsons dated the 17th of June 2014. It is to Chris Ojard, Roderick Williams, Jarnell Singh, Angela Vanden Bogert, and you, among others. And he says, I've just spoken with Cartwright King about a new CQR. Can you help with CQR? Is that one of the cases?
Sorry,
in the scheme?
so I was trying to think of the. I think it was the initial setting out of the complaint by an applicant in the scheme. I can't remember what CQR stood for, but I think that's what it was.
From Howe & Co. that references the Helen Rose report. You'll recall that the Helen Rose report was retrospectively disclosed in a number of prosecution cases as it drew into question some of the statements made by Post Office Limited's expert witness Gareth Jenkins. A copy of the Helen Rose report has made its way to Howe & Co., who are now referencing it generally in their CQRs. For example, the CQR on M060 refers to the Helen Rose report. However, the Helen Rose report was not sent to this applicant. The point of concern is that the M060 CQR is starting to make the link between, one, the fact that the Helen Rose report makes clear that Gareth Jenkins knew of issues with Horizon, and two, the fact that GJ, Gareth Jenkins, never mentioned these issues in his prosecution evidence. See paragraph 53 in the attached. This line of inquiry draws into question the credibility of Gareth Jenkins' evidence. The sharing of the Helen Rose report between applicants is potentially a breach of solicitors' ethics / contempt of court. However, Cartwright-King and I don't believe attacking the solicitors on this point would be of benefit. If anything, it may draw more attention to the Helen Rose report. Instead, our preferred approach is to try to downplay the importance of the Helen Rose report in any Post Office Limited investigation reports. We recommend minimalising or ignoring entirely the Helen Rose report when responding to CQRs. If the investigation team need guidance on how to address any Helen Rose report related questions, I suggest that they, or the lawyer here at BD, addresses these directly to Cartwright-King on a case-by-case basis. And then he asks, please let me know if you're happy with this proposed approach. So regardless of the Simon Clarke advice, would you agree that Mr. Parsons was joining the dots in quite clear terms in relation to the implications of the Helen Rose report for the credibility of Gareth Jenkins?
Yes.
And in light of that, did you think his preferred and recommended approach for cases in the scheme was appropriate?
So, looking at the two things separately, because I have considered and reflected on this email, the linking of the Helen Rose report with the credibility of Gareth Jenkins' evidence, I did not. Now, as with the previous email, now I read it again, I understand, and knowing what I now know, that the statement about starting the point of concern is that MR60 CQR, that is far more significant than I realised at the time. I suspect I would have skimmed over that. The issue that is, I think, a matter of regret for me is, among many, if I may say so, but regardless of my knowledge, regardless of my expertise or otherwise in law or criminal law, I don't think an approach to try and play down the importance of the Helen Rose report is satisfactory advice. And the reason for that, and particularly in terms of the spirit of the scheme, is that if it were not important, and my assumption throughout the whole of this time was that it was not as important as it was being made to be, and I accept that assumption is now proved to be incorrect, that if it was not important, then that should have been clearly stated in response to any reference to it in a CQR, and the reasons why. And And I wish, and indeed on reflection, I should have challenged that.
That document.
Sorry, I can't say exactly why I didn't do that, but we very much, if you like, segregated the matters with which we were dealing with. So insofar as I read this and engaged with it, it would have been, this was in advice to the investigation team, and I wasn't involved in the putting together the investigation reports, and I would not have read a lot of the associated documentation.
In August of 2013, Simon Clarke had cause to write an advice which advised the Post Office on its duties to record and retain material. And in that advice, he referred to having been provided with information to suggest that there had been an instruction by someone within the Post Office that minutes of a conference call about horizon integrity should be shredded. Did anyone ever raise that advice with you or that issue with you?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
So I wonder if that might be an appropriate moment for the first morning break.
Yes, but before we do, can I just ask you this? When Miss Price was asking you questions, upon the assumption that you had read what I'll call the Clarke advice, you said that you thought if you had read it, you would have questioned Mr. Parsons, Jarnell, and Mr. Ujard in some way to understand its significance. All right?
Yes.
That's what you thought you would have done.
Yes.
And they are obviously all internal, if I can put it in that way, to the Post Office.
Yes.
Would you have thought about what your duty might have been as the secretary of the scheme to inform Sir Anthony Hooper as the chair of the working party about that document?
So all of the issues, that arose in relation to Horizon or indeed prosecutions had a much wider application than just those cases in the scheme. So I think I would have wanted to understand the situation before I did anything wider. If I might take your point slightly further, if I had read this and had asked questions about it and was not satisfied with the response I got, then I think Sir Anthony Hooper, as opposed to going to the working group, would have been a person that I would have discussed this with.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, what time should we start again, Ms. Price?
15:15, sir, I think is 10 minutes.
Fine, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, sir. Can you still see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Turning, please, to the issue of remote access to the Horizon system. You address this and you define remote access as the ability of Fujitsu employees to alter transaction data or data in branch accounts without the consent or knowledge of sub-postmasters. And you address that at paragraphs 18 to 25 of your statement. That's page 7, if you want to have those paragraphs to hand. We have already looked at an email in which the issue of remote access was raised in April 2014, and that was the email from Steve Darlington, dated the 8th of April. Could we have that back on screen, please? It's POL 48049. You'll recall, because we read the email out earlier, but if we can scroll down, please, to the bottom email in this chain so we can have it there. That's it. The Dear Ron, 8th of April 2014 email. This was the email which raised an email between Andy Wynne and Alan Lusher in a case called Ward, which was said to explicitly state that Fujitsu could remotely change the figures in branch with without a sub-postmaster's knowledge or authority. And this prompted Mr. Warmington to propose this email, which also addressed the Helen Rose report, for discussion at the working group weekly meeting. Bottom of page 2 of this document, please. We see your email. And it's the first sentence or paragraph here. And you ask if anyone knows anything about the email being quoted below about remote alteration of figures in branch. And you say, I think that this is a new one on me. Was that new to you at this point then, the issue of remote access? Or was the thing that was new this particular email?
I think the thing that was new was this particular email. My previous knowledge of the issues relating to remote access, as far as I recall, was specifically in relation to Spot Review 5, concerning a team at Bracknell which allegedly were altering transaction data without the knowledge of sub-postmasters. I think I'm paraphrasing there. And this was an issue that cropped up on a number of occasions during my involvement with the scheme, and that was the lens through which I think I viewed everything relating to remote access.
Going to the top of page 1, please. This is your email of the 14th of April 2014. And 3 lines in, you say there are a few questions we need to answer, I think. And this is in the context of the email. Andy Parsons was going to speak to Andy Wynne about it in the sentence above. And you say there are a few questions we need to answer, I think. 1, what is the explanation? 2, has this statement been used publicly, in court or otherwise? 3, have the contents of this email been disclosed, either A, through the criminal disclosure process, or B, to Second Sight through responses to spot reviews, or C, as part of one of our investigations, or D, to Second Sight in other miscellaneous material we have provided in the past. 4, if this email has not been disclosed publicly, regardless of what our response is, we need to consider how it came into Howe & Co.'s possession. Can you help, having posed these questions, with what further involvement in this particular issue you had, if any?
So, looking at the documents that have been provided to me, on a couple of occasions between then and me leaving the post office, issues relating to this arose, and I'm not able to see from the documents, and I have no recollection of any continuing process. But in relation, but to try and address it through the lens of how things worked at the time, this would have been me having been sent something and trying to do some sort of analysis of what the key issues might be so that Andy Parsons could create a brief for Chris Orjard so that he could have a conversation at the working group. And however unsatisfactory that might now feel to me and also seem now, a lot of my role was trying to pull things together to make sure that people could answer the questions they needed to. So I engaged, I'm afraid, more with the process than the detail. I don't remember checking the brief. I don't remember seeing the brief that Andy would have done. And I don't remember any other activity specifically relating to this.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 30091394? The first email in the chain starts towards the bottom of the page and is from Jessica Barker, dated the 13th of October 2014. And she forwards on to you, among a number of others, revised draft CRR in a case that was being looked at by the scheme. The timings of this email chain are a little confusing because your email above Jessica Barker's is 11:46 and your email above of the same date is 10:59. So I'm not sure what's going on with the date stamps there, but your email above appears to be a reply to Jessica Barker's email. Does that look right to you? If we look at Jessica Barker's email, scrolling down, we have, Dear all, Second Sight have released a revised version of their draft CRR for case M053. Some background to this, you will remember that Second Sight originally uploaded a draft CRR some weeks ago. They've produced a new draft CRR and then just explains what's attached to the email and what the deadline for responses is. Going further up, please, to your email above, which would appear, would you agree, to be a reply to Jessica Barker's email. It says, is this the first which references remote access, ?
Yes.
I think we need to pick this up very robustly in our response, as this could become public and Second Sight seem to be asking for proof that something didn't happen. And you say, Mel, could we dust off our lines on this, as this will be with the applicant and advisor tomorrow?
Yes.
So you seem to have been aware of there being lines to take on remote access before this, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. The lines to take that you had in mind, where had they originated from?
I don't recall.
Melanie Caulfield responds above the same day as follows. Our current line, if we are asked about remote access potentially being used to change branch data /transactions, is simply, this is not and has never been possible. This line holds, but if we are pressed regarding Second Sight's points about admitting there is remote access, etc., we can say there is no remote access for individual branch transactions. We might get pushed further on it and be asked by media to confirm whether or not there is any remote access. We will need to make the distinction re-access as straightforward as we can, so suggest there is no remote access for individual branch transactions. Fujitsu has support access to the back end of the system used for software updates and maintenance. This is, of course, strictly controlled with security processes in place, but could not in any event be used for individual branch transactions. There is no facility at all within the system for this. And then Melanie Caulfield says, I'll get a view from Fujitsu comms, but let me have any comments. Did the existing line being, this is not and has not ever been possible, trouble you at all on reading this email? Given that what follows seems to be alternative, more fulsome lines.
So I think it depends on the question being asked. So if I could address that by way of what I picked up in the, I think it was the second bundle of documents that were sent to me by the inquiry. In October, I think I was starting to get a little bit confused and maybe concerned about the way that the issue of remote access was being defined and therefore being answered. And in fact, that was one of the amendments to my statement, that I thought a wider piece of work needed to be done. I can't now remember the exact terminology, but to identify what the specific questions were and then what the answers were, because I think many of us had in our minds something different when we were answering the questions, and I wasn't sure that we were turning our minds specifically to what the point that needed to be addressed was, and therefore giving the correct answer.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 001 49276? Going, please, to the first email in this chain, which is towards the bottom of page 1. The email from Melanie Caulfield to Andrew Parsons and Jessica Barker, dated the 17th of October 2014. And the subject is remote access, reactive statement in strictest confidence. And it reads, hi both, a quick update because Fujitsu comms have come back with revised wording. I think they have made our statement stronger, so that is good, but I suspect because there is, of course, some remote access so that the system can be maintained, etc., Second Sight will continue to pursue. And then there are some lines underneath that. If we're asked about remote access potentially being used to change branch transactions, it is simply the system is designed to prevent any access, either remote or direct, that would allow individual branch transactions to be altered. If pressed further, the system has been designed to prevent any access, either remote or direct, that would allow individual branch transactions to be altered. Fujitsu has controlled access to the Horizon system for software updates and maintenance purposes. This is, of course, strictly controlled with security processes in place, but could not in any event be used to alter individual branch transactions. There is no facility within the system for this. As far as you can remember, was this email prompted by the particular case discussed in the 13th of October email chain that we've just looked at?
I don't know.
Going then to the reply from Andrew Parsons above, dated the 19th of October 2014. Mr. Parsons says, Mel, I'm just about comfortable with this. I understand that although Fujitsu cannot alter individual branch transactions, they can inject a transaction into a branch's accounts, brackets, through use of this facility, though use of this facility is very, very rare. So we just need to keep being careful with any changes to the wording below until we get to the bottom of this. This email is then forwarded to you, Patrick Bork, and one other by Melanie Caulfield. And the email simply says, so this is the first point at which you enter the email chain at the top, and it simply says, as discussed. Can you recall discussions around this at the time?
No.
This reactive statement, can you recall whether it was for use for a particular case, whether the M053 case or another, or more widely?
I can't recall, and I don't remember the case, and I probably didn't read the case. I think it would have been for wider use, and I think it might have been if a question was asked in relation to remote access on the back of the release of a case report to an applicant, the applicant or anybody associated with that applicant might have spoken to the press about it if they thought it was significant, therefore having a position in relation to wider application.
It seems that after this email, you were then sent further information from Fujitsu. Could we have on screen, please, POL 003 49472? In the middle of the first page, we have an email from you dated the 20th of October 2014, and you are responding to James Davidson's email of the same date, which starts at the bottom of this page.
Yes.
And if we can go over the page, please. We have this. Belinda, I found the response to Rod's note. Happy to discuss further, let me know. And then there are some answers in the email below, just scrolling slowly down, please, which appear to have been provided in response to questions put by Roderick Williams in April of that year. Is that right?
Yes.
And a summary is provided of Fujitsu's response. And the summary is, there is no ability to delete or change records a branch creates in either Old Horizon or Horizon Online. Transactions in both systems are created in a secure and auditable way to assure integrity and have either a checksum, brackets Old Horizon, or a digital signature, brackets Horizon Online, are time-stamped, have a unique sequential number, and are securely stored via the core audit process in the audit vault. The second point, whilst a facility exists to inject additional transactions, in the event of a system error, these transactions would have a signature that is unique. Sub-postmaster IDs are not used, and the audit log would house a record of these. As above, this does not delete or amend original transactions, but creates a new and additional transactions. Third point, this facility is built into the system to enable corrections to be made if a system error /bug is identified and the master database needs updating as a result. This is not a unique feature of Horizon. Fourth, approvals to inject new transactions are governed by the change process, two-factor authentications, and a 4 eyes process. A unique identifier is created and can be audited for this type of transaction. Within HNGX, Horizon would require more extensive work to investigate, as explained below. Going back then to your comments on this on the first page, and it's about halfway down there.
Yes.
And this may be the email you were referring to earlier.
Is.
When you said for information, sending this on to Melanie Caulfield, Patrick Bork, Angela van der Bogert, and Tom Weschler. This is Fujitsu's response to a series of questions about what we are now, in my view, incorrectly badging remote access, as we have discussed today, we need to set out in more detail what the position is and is not in relation to what can and cannot be done to Horizon data, by whom and under what circumstances. I will set something up to this effect with Fujitsu and others. Were you aware at the time you were writing this email, so in October 2014, that Deloitte had produced a draft report for discussion in May of that year, addressing, among other things, remote access? And that's the report dated the 23rd of May 2014, which I think you were provided a copy of when you made your statement.
Yes, that would be under the heading of Project Zebra.
Yes, that's correct.
So I was aware of Deloitte being commissioned to provide a report for the CIO at the request of the board. Yes, as I recall. I have no recollection of it specifically addressing remote access or Deloitte being instructed to consider the matter of remote access. So I didn't make the link between this and that report.
Moving to November 2014, please. Could we have on screen POL 001 42406? Starting, please, with the top of page 2 of this document. There is an email from James Davidson to you, dated the 12th of November 2014. And it's copied to 2 others. This subject is March 2010 incident details. And Mr. Davidson provides details about an incident from that date. This was a document which was sent to you by the inquiry at the time you were asked for a statement.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to read through it?
Yes.
I'll take it relatively quickly, therefore, but please do say if you want me to slow down or you want to go back to anything.
Yes.
The problem experienced by a sub-postmaster was a duplicate transaction being generated when the system went offline unexpectedly. And that's the first paragraph there under background. The sub-postmaster spotted it and called the helpline for assistance. We can see in the timeline the accounts were repaired by the insertion of auditable records into the branch database to negate the duplicate transaction. The fix was approved by the post office, and in this instance, the sub-postmaster was also told. So we can see underneath there, approved by Post Office Limited, sub-postmaster informed. But would you agree, having read this summary of events, that this insertion could have been conducted without the sub-postmaster knowing about it or approving it?
That wasn't the way that I had subsequently read it, so I don't recall it from the time. Although I do now recall that that one incident had arisen, but I hadn't interpreted it the way that you are describing it. Reviewing it now, what I have taken from it is that this was a system or a change to a system that was being piloted in a small number of offices, and a sub-postmaster had noticed an issue. Therefore, the sub-postmaster was aware, and the sub-postmaster's accounts were corrected with the agreement and with the visibility of the sub-postmaster, and as it was a pilot, there were arrangements in place to fix the issue, which I have assumed meant that before the system was rolled out, that the matter was resolved, and indeed the pilot had successfully identified possibly more issues, but successfully identified and rectified this issue.
It is fortunate, isn't it, that the sub-postmaster spotted the duplicate transaction in the first place, because if he hadn't and he'd had problems balancing, might this not just have been another unexplained shortfall case?
I can see theoretically that might have been the case. I didn't think of it in that way, but I accept that it could have been the case. What I'm not clear about, because I've never even seen a Horizon screen, I don't know how obvious such an issue would have been. So I accept that if the sub-postmaster is part of a pilot, they would probably be more alert and more diligent in terms of spotting things, because that would be part of the reason for a pilot. But I hadn't viewed it in the way that you describe it.
Looking then to your response to this email at the bottom of page 1, please. So you forward this on the 12th of November 2014 to Patrick Bourke and Mark Underwood, copied to Andrew Parsons. And you say, details of the transaction inserted by Fujitsu. Mark, could you please check the branch against applications in the scheme? And then going to the top of the page, please, still the 12th of November 2014. Mark Underwood replies and says this: "Hi all, I'm extremely pleased to say it does not relate to any of the branches in the scheme. For information, below is the affected branch." Why did you understand Mark Underwood to be extremely pleased that this was not a scheme case?
I can't say that I understood it at all. I can understand why I would have asked him or somebody to look to see if it was a case in the scheme. And in view of the fact that this issue had been identified, then I think we would have wanted to assure ourselves that it was properly explained in any post office response to the scheme, and I would imagine that was my reason. I don't want to assume what Mark might have thought by trying to second guess what was in his mind when he wrote that.
Did you feel any relief that the incident did not relate to any of the branches in the scheme at the time?
I'm not sure that I had any feeling about it whatsoever, insofar as I had been reassured, I think, having bearing in mind the previous emails which talked about the possibility of transactions being inserted, which was something I had not turned my mind to. The fact that it appears to have happened once, and that was during a pilot exercise, and the issue had been identified and rectified, I think I was reassured rather than anything. But I would have been concerned had this case been in the scheme and this issue had not been correctly articulated. So in that respect, I suppose I would have been pleased.
Could we have on screen, please, paragraph 20 of Ms. Cortes-Martin's statement, please? That's page 7. towards the bottom of that page. You say here at paragraph 20, the issue of remote access was raised by Second Sight on a number of occasions during my time on the scheme, but my understanding was that Post Office Limited considered that the matter had been addressed in response to Spot Review 5, and as far as I was aware, Post Office Limited and Fujitsu maintained the position that transaction data could not be changed remotely without the knowledge of a sub-postmaster. Is that an accurate description of your understanding at the time, notwithstanding that November 2014 email?
Yes, I think it is. For me, it's rather like a number of the other issues. I was reassured by people I spoke to that this issue arose as a result of Mr. Rudkin's visit to Bracknell. And again, I understand now, with the benefit of hindsight and knowing what I now know, that this was a far more significant and broader issue. And I viewed everything through that lens. The issue was whether or not transaction data could be changed remotely without the knowledge of a sub-postmaster. And on the face of it, that was my understanding, and that continued to be my understanding.
I'd like to move, please, to Second Sight's role and how this was managed by those involved in Project Sparrow.
Yeah.
The statement can come, actually, if we can keep the statement on screen, please, and go to page 4 of it. At paragraph 10, you say, although my job title was Programme Director, it became clear early on that I did not have any strategic responsibility or any final authority to make decisions in relation to the scheme, and whilst I managed a small team of colleagues carrying out work in relation to the scheme, I did not supervise or manage any other persons in managerial positions. Myself and my team were very much coordinators as opposed to decision makers, carrying out the instructions and requirements of the scheme working group in my capacity as Secretariat, the board, its subcommittee, and Post Office Limited General Counsel. Should we take it from this that you consider your role as Programme Director of Project Sparrow was mistitled?
Yes. Sorry, can I clarify? I think in the first instance, we established a programme board, and I think that the title at that stage was correct. Some of the documentation that I have seen, and from my recollection, I would have said a programme director or maybe a programme manager or a project manager, but I think that would have been more accurate. Subsequently, the governance for this not the scheme, but the entirety of the work that would have fallen within the programme changed, specifically when the board set up a subcommittee. And I think by that time the steering group had ceased to meet, I think. But trying to run a programme board, with a very small team to support a programme board, a subcommittee of the board, and the working group was far too much governance, and so the programme board ceased to exist. As far as I can see, it didn't meet after April. So I think somewhere between maybe February and April, it had become clear to me that this wasn't a programme director role in the normal sorts of event, in the normal scheme of things. So in that respect, I think that is correct.
You say at paragraph 31 of your statement that Paula Venables chaired a steering group which oversaw the work of Project Sparrow. Did you ever raise your lack of strategic responsibility or final authority to make decisions with Paula Venables at all? Was it something you were dissatisfied with?
No, it wasn't something that I was dissatisfied with. My recollection is that Paula somebody had asked me to provide the secretariat to the working group. So that was the email of the 8th of October. Then, and you've referred me to it during this session. In November, there was a meeting of the steering board, and actually Paula announced at that meeting that I would be the programme director for Sparrow. I do not recall having had any conversation with anybody about that prior to that meeting. I don't want to, or I'm reluctant to attribute anything to anybody else, but I think Angela might have been as surprised as I was by that announcement. I did not challenge that announcement, but I wasn't disappointed or concerned when later it transpired that I would have been doing primarily what I had anticipated in the first place, and that is running the scheme and supporting the scheme.
Moving please to paragraph 30 of the statement, that's page 17. You say, in terms of Project Sparrow, I am not aware of the background to its setup, as this was before my involvement in the scheme. I do not recall if I was ever told its original remit. Once you became Programme Director for Project Sparrow, did you seek to further understand the project's genesis at all?
No, I can't say I did. What I was more concerned about was trying to define what it might be going forward. Because, and I think this, if you like, summarises where I started on this, and that was that Second Sight report had published in August.
July, I think.
July. And the scheme and Post Office's response to that had published in August, and therefore my understanding was a line had been drawn under pretty much what went before, and therefore I didn't concern myself too much with what had happened in the past. I was just looking at how things might be managed going forward.
And on that, could we have on screen, please, POL 3030694? This is a document entitled Project Sparrow. And going to the second page, please, we can see about halfway down the page the initials BC. Are they your initials?
They are, yes.
And the date, the 13th of November 2013.
Yes.
So relatively shortly after you started in the roles, but before the fixed-term contract started in January.
And before I took over the role officially.
Is this a document which you authored?
I think so, yes.
And going back to page 1, please. We can see there the first heading is scope. You mentioned before your concern being what Project Sparrow would be going forwards. Was this you setting out your idea of what it would be or what it was?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
There are said to be 4 work streams falling within the scope of the project. There are, in fact, 6 main bullet points, but just looking to just the headings under there for the work streams: the mediation process and working group, the review of criminal cases, brackets completed, disclosure, development and implementation of intervention prosecutions policy, including potential permanent complaints handling arrangements, final report for closure of the project and the issue to enable return to BAU, is that business as usual?
Yes.
And then finally, targeted business improvements strictly limited to those parts of the processes which are specifically linked to the scheme. Just picking up on the review of criminal cases.
Yes.
Was your understanding of what the review referred to here was?
That that Post Office had an enduring responsibility in relation to its prosecutions, an enduring responsibility of disclosure, I think was the terminology as I understood it, and therefore any issues that arose as a result of investigation into complaints on the scheme had to be considered in terms of whether or not any disclosure was required. There were a team of people, or there were some people doing that in Cartwright King, and that was an ongoing piece of work.
You've put in brackets here completed. So was that your understanding, that the review of criminal cases was complete?
Oh, so the review of criminal cases, yes.
Going then to success criteria further down the page, please. At the 4th bullet point, and I should say directly under the success criteria, we have a by the end of April as a goal. And the 4th bullet point, second site involvement, will have ended with Post Office re-established as credible investigators of complaints, bracket, endorsed by second site, political support for completion of second site involvement, and 3rd, JFSA neutral position on SS involvement. Did this reflect a view of the Post Office that second site's involvement after the interim report should be limited to involvement in concluding the scheme, rather than any further investigation or reporting on the Horizon system itself?
Yes, if I'm understanding your question correctly, my understanding was that the view within Post Office was that second site's role changed following the publication of its reports into one of reviewing investigation reports on complaints in the scheme.
And where did your understanding on that come from?
I really couldn't say. I think looking at the timing of this document, I must have spoken to a number of people that had been involved to inform what it might look like. And therefore, that is something I would have picked up. I see from the bundle of documents that I have been provided with that there was a reference, I think, made by Andy Parsons about a decision had already been made to remove Second Sight from the process, but I don't think I ever found out where that originated. It seemed to have come from a conversation between Susan Crichton and Second Sight, but by this time Susan Crichton, if she hadn't actually left, she was not in the office very much. So I don't think I ever got to the bottom of that. But I think looking at the timescale here, this was, as it turns out, a hugely optimistic timescale, that by the end of April, the scheme would have completed. And therefore, with the completion of the scheme, future investigations would be carried out by Post Office, and Second Sight wouldn't be required to review them. So we would be into business as usual.
The last bullet point on this page says new investigation /intervention /enforcement /prosecutions arrangements in place, announced possibly in the final report and operating fully, potentially includes investigation arrangements, intervention arrangements, prosecutions policy, and permanent appeals /mediation scheme. Did you understand it to be a Post Office priority to re-establish prosecutions of sub-postmasters and others working in branch?
No, I didn't. I think my understanding is that prosecutions had ceased before I became involved in the scheme, and there, certainly from the point of view of General Counsel, there didn't seem to be any rush to start them again until this whole process had been completed. But that was just a perception. I couldn't tell you where that came from, but certainly I didn't. If there were any pressure to restart them, it would not have been exerted on me, and I was not aware of it.
We saw in Paula Vennell's email announcing the roles you would be taking on, and that was in October 2013, that you had been asked to help coordinate a short internal lessons learned exercise
Yes.
on the process leading up to the publication of the interim Second Sight report. It appears that you, from the documents, that you reported to the Audit, Risk and Compliance Subcommittee on this on the 15th of May 2014. Could we have those minutes on screen, please? The reference is POL 000 21426. We see here the minutes, 15th of May 2014, and in attendance is your name is there, Programme Director Project Sparrow, brackets minute POL ARC 1423 only. And then going to page 4, please. About 2/3 of the way down the page, we see a heading, Project Sparrow, with that reference on the left there. And Belinda Crowe joined the meeting. So you were joining the meeting just for this specific item, is that right?
Yes.
And then this, at B, the committee received a report on lessons learned from the handling of the commissioning of the Second Sight investigation into Horizon and subsequent events. Do you recall delivering this report now?
Yes.
Casting your mind back, what were you told about why you were looking into lessons learned from this?
So I think I alluded to this earlier. It was quite tricky because I had felt that I was being asked to. I felt in the first instance I was being asked to look at whether or not someone was to blame for the fact that there was some confusion about the establishment of the scheme. The reason that I'm vague about it is because at the heart of this, and I'm choosing my words carefully because I don't know the circumstances, which is actually relevant here. At the heart of this was the departure of Susan Crichton. And what I was keen not to get involved in is to get involved in any sort of apportionment of blame in relation to what might have led to her departure. Not only because I wouldn't have been prepared to do that, but because I didn't know what led to her departure. My working assumption was that the decision to appoint Second Sight and undertake an investigation, and then at the end of the report, the decision to announce the establishment of a mediation scheme and the involvement of JFSA and Second Sight, was felt to be decisions made by Paula and Alice with MPs, as opposed to necessarily engaging the wider business. That was what I understood to be at the heart of this. And then subsequently, and this is the issue that I think I focused on, which I think is explained in the minutes here, subsequently, almost having made an announcement, because it was expedient to make an announcement, the Post Office then wasn't geared up to actually accommodating that announcement. Therefore, to announce the establishment of a scheme without the people in place to support that scheme, or having worked through the detail of that scheme, seemed to be creating a problem in the business. So insofar as I can recall, and I haven't been provided with my paper, but I think it was a very short paper, avoiding any attribution of blame, because I didn't consider that was my role, but to talk about the importance of engaging the business in business decisions and the importance of the business being able to respond in a way that was fleet of foot to anything that it wanted to do quickly.
And is that what we see here at C in this summary given in the minutes? It was noted that there was a need for a formal protocol for enterprise-wide response to enable the business to respond quickly and effectively to any crisis, high-risk or high-profile issue. The committee also discussed whether there was a need for an identified in-house team ready to deal with such issues.
That's at the heart of it, and I think that was the only thing I could sensibly recommend.
And at D, we see it was agreed, it was agreed by the committee. It was agreed that establishing such a team or teams would be sensible action, and that appropriate oversight by the CEO and or the board was important. The committee also suggested that scenario planning should be considered and a virtual crisis management team and support, lawyers, accountants, internal and external resources be put together. So was that subparagraph D, was that the discussion, recording the discussions that were had at the meeting as opposed to your report? Or was
that was recording the discussions at the meeting, flowing from, I think, a discussion of my report, because I think that was, insofar as I can remember, I think that was a key feature, the ability to respond to issues quickly.
Why was it that an in-house team seemed to be sensible to those in the discussion as opposed to an external team?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think so if it had been the ability to pull together a small team, such as the small team that I worked with to deal with these issues, that would have been primarily in-house. I don't recall the discussion. I don't know that anything significant arose in the course of the discussion which said it had to be in-house. What I would say that Post Office relied heavily on externals.
That document can come down now. Sarah, I wonder if that's a convenient moment for the second morning break.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is it 1/4 by my clock, which would take us to 25 past?
All right, fine.
Thank you, sir. Hello, sir. Is the connection working as it should still?
Yeah, yes, it is. Thank you.
Ms. Cortes-Martin, you've already referred to your understanding of the Post Office's position that Second Sight's role changed after the publication of its interim report. Would you agree that there should have been an engagement letter clearly setting out Second Sight's role and responsibilities in relation to the scheme from the very get-go?
I would.
It may be that you've already given your answer to the chair on this in response to different questions, but what is your understanding as to why this wasn't done? I appreciate it was before you started properly in the role.
Well, I think it was because, and maybe this links to the lessons learned piece, and that was that there was a desire to follow up Second Sight's report with an announcement very quickly. And again, I'm speculating and going on what my perception is rather than any hard facts. And therefore, it was my view that not enough thought had gone into how this whole thing might work going forward, which meant that I felt we were almost, if you'll forgive the terminology, retrofitting some stuff, and this was one such issue. I have no idea whether or not anyone had a conversation with Second Sight about this and the engagement letter was not seen as necessary, or whether or not Second Sight's view changed. I have no idea of the reason, but why there were differing views. But I think there was a haste in announcing the scheme and some components of it, which meant that some of the basics weren't done.
As Programme Director of Project Sparrow, what was your understanding of Second Sight's mandate throughout the period you held the role?
It was to produce, and the terminology might have changed as following Sir Anthony Hooper's arrival and the scheme developing, which it did, but it was primarily to review Post Office's investigations into the complaints and support the working group in whichever way the working group wanted support from Second Sight. So I think those were the two facets of Second Sight's engagement.
You say at the start of paragraph 58 of your statement, and we can go to it if that would help.
Thank you.
That's page 28 of the statement, please. at the start of paragraph 58, I have been asked if I at all considered there to be a difference between what Post Office Limited stated publicly about the mediation scheme compared to what was discussed internally. I do not recall thinking that there was a difference. However, I do think that it became clear once the scheme got underway that Post Office Limited's view of Second Sight's role and how the scheme would work differed from others' views, such as JFSA and Second Sight. So on this point about you not recalling a difference between what was being stated publicly about the scheme and what was discussed internally, could we have on screen, please, POL 00116285? This top email is from Chris Ojard, dated the 23rd of February 2014, and is providing comments in red on an email originally sent by Paula Venables to you, Chris Ojard, and Angela Vanden Bogert, among others, on the 21st of February 2014. So if we can just scroll up a little, please. We can see there the 21st of February email from Paula Venables to you and those others that I've just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Going, please, to page 2 and point 3.6. And so the text in red is that applied by Chris Ojard. The text in black is from Paula Venables. And at 3.6 it reads, potential cost, and this is of the scheme, 10 million plus serious. When we went into this, the motivation, brackets Alice and me, was to find out what was really going on, to create so much noise, and to put in place processes that we felt were closer to the way we wanted Post Office to be run, brackets more supportive, going forwards. The system that was in place at the time was when we were a division of Royal Mail and accountable to their legal and security directors. Sparrow was our opportunity to reset the dial for Post Office as a standalone business. We did not intend it to result in major compensation for policies that were followed and applied to thousands of others who did not have problems and which were operating in a different corporate context. We seem to have lost this focus, and I'm looking for advice on how we regain it. It should be part of the Second Sight TH pre-meet in Monday and will be a question from the board, brackets Chris, Mark, Belinda. What did you understand the message to be coming from Paula Venables in this email about the level of compensation that she and Alice Perkins envisaged being paid to sub-postmasters at the outset?
That it was much lower than Post Office, I think, informed by, I think, some Bond Dickinson, or if not some PA consulting analysis, were suggesting on the basis of having looked at some of the early allegations and case questionnaires.
What did you understand Paula Venables to be seeking from you and others in terms of a steer on what to do about her concerns? What was she asking for advice on?
So I'm not overly clear on this, but a couple of things spring to mind. And one is, and this cropped up on a number of occasions, and indeed I think was a comment made by CEDA, that, that was the mediation company that were assisting us with mediations, that this was established to be a a mediation scheme and not a compensation scheme. And yet, I think already Paula and the board were concerned that this was viewed as a compensation scheme. So that was one point. And the other, I think what she was trying to do was to ask how we could get what seemed to her to be a system that was getting out of control back in control. Sorry, that's a rather vague answer, but that's the way it's reading to me.
Did you give any advice in response to that paragraph in particular?
I don't recall. I may have done. I don't recall.
Does sight of that paragraph change the paragraph in your statement we've just looked to in any way as to the difference between discussions internally and what was being said publicly about the scheme or not?
I don't think it does, because I think this is what Paul is saying, is the original intention of the scheme as she envisaged it, or she and Alice envisaged it, therefore presumably as announced, is changing. So actually maybe the opposite is true, that she is saying that what is happening in reality is slightly different to what the original intention was, which I think is why I did not feel that there was a difference between what was being said internally or externally.
That document can come down now, thank you. Going back to Second Sight's role and attempts to put in place a letter of engagement in 2014, could we have on screen, please, POL 001 47169? Starting, please, with page 2 towards the bottom. We're looking for the 10th of January 2014 email, 10th of January, from Ian Henderson to Chris Ojard, copied to Ron Warmington and to you. And the subject is proposed engagement letter. And this is an email forwarding another email discussing the terms of Second Sight's engagement letter. And the original email is on page 3, please, about halfway down. It is from Ian Henderson, and it is the 6th of January 2014. Originally to Christopher Ojard and copied to Ron Warmington. Going to page 4, please. Under point 7, Mr. Henderson wrote, "The proposed scope of services schedule raises a number of issues that are at variance with assurances previously provided by Post Office Limited to both Second Sight and to the Right Honourable James Arbuthnot MP. In particular, the scope of services schedule attacks the fundamental principle that Second Sight operates completely independently of Post Office Limited and conducts its investigations and prepares reports as it sees fit." So just stopping there, if we can go back to page 2, please, and to your email of the 10th of January 2014. And you request a meeting. So Ian, Chris has discussed this with me, and I understand you and he have spoken. Would it be possible for us to meet on Wednesday morning next week to discuss the engagement letter? We think possibly face-to-face is better if that works for you and Ron. And then going, please, to the top of this page. Of page 1, forgive me. And so you forwarded this email thread to Andrew Parsons on the 12th of January 2014. And you say, I have made some comments in caps to the points SS have made, so points in capital letters. And can we go to one of the comments, please, on page 4? And so the comments made by Mr. Henderson that aren't in capitals, your response to, are we right to see the capital letters there as being your response to what he's saying?
I think so, yes.
And you write, we need to consider carefully what and how we seek to fetter. SAH,
Sir Anthony Hooper,
has made it clear that Second Sight can include what it wants, so we need to tread carefully. What did you mean when you said we need to consider carefully what and how we seek to fetter? So
first of all, I've been sent several copies of the draft engagement letter, and I can't guarantee I've related the exact one to the exact email. So I'm speaking in the abstract here. First of all, I would say that the commenting in this way, one doesn't necessarily expect that some 10 years later you're going to be asking questions about it. So I acknowledge that in this and other emails, I have not chosen my words as I might have done had I known this. But I think what I'm saying here is there must be something that Second Sight has objected to that makes it look as though Post Office is trying to fetter it. And what I'm saying is we need to think carefully about the extent to which we do that. And actually, it's nothing more than that. So don't try to fetter Second Sight in a way that's not appropriate, particularly in light of what Sir Anthony Hooper has said. I realise, looking at it now, it's not worded particularly well, but I think that was all I was trying to. That's all I was trying to do. I think what Post Office were trying to do was to tread a line between trying to do what clearly Paula and the board wanted, and that was to keep the focus for the scheme without getting into any difficulty about making it look as though Second Sight's independence was being fettered in any way.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 001-99572? This is an email chain dated the 13th of January 2014 involving Alan Bates, Paula Venables, you and others regarding the scope of Second Sight's engagement. And the initial email in the chain is on page 2, please. And this is from Mr. Bates, and he wrote as follows: to Paula Venables, 13th of January 2014, subject concerns. Hello, Paula. I am quite concerned about what I have been hearing recently about Post Office Limited trying to change the scope of the scheme in order to restrict the terms of the investigation and stop certain matters being discussed. I should make it clear that JFSA signed up to the details as were discussed and documented last July-August, and alterations to what was agreed will result in JFSA withdrawing from the working group in the scheme. I do not know if you're aware of what is being proposed by the new Post Office Limited members of the working group, but from what I can glean, it seems as if Post Office Limited are trying to hijack the process, which is something your minister assured me would not happen in her letter to me last September. I would be grateful if you would look into what is happening at present. The impression I am getting seems very different to the discussions we had last year. Going, please, to the top of the chain, page 1. This is an email sent by Sophie Bialuski,
I'm sorry, I never get it right myself.
Dated, again, the 13th of January 2014. And we can see her role at the bottom of her email was Public Affairs Manager for the Post Office. And she says, so this is sent to Mark Davies and Nina Arnott. She says, thanks, Mark. Had a quick chat with Belinda, who has picked up with Second Sight. Let's all keep each other up to date with any news. This email came through the day after the email we've just looked at, your email to Mr. Parsons with the reference to the fettering and the concern about that. Was there anything in what Mr. Bates was saying that the Post Office was trying to hijack the process, from your perspective?
I hadn't made the link. I don't know if I made the link at the time. I didn't make the link when reading these documents. But could we just scroll down to Alan's comments, please?
That's page 2.
Right. Right. So when I first read this, I thought this related to something that had been discussed at a working group meeting, but that's not actually what Alan is saying.
What was the issue that was discussed at the working?
I can't recall. Sorry, what I meant was that I thought Alan, because Alan did on a couple of occasions write about concerns about the working group and discussions at the working group, but looking at it again, that's not exactly what he was saying. The reality is, I don't know, but in view of the fact that I spoke to Second Sight, there is a distinct possibility that Second Sight had spoken to JFSA and said that the terms of engagement seemed to be limiting, and therefore I spoke to Second Sight about it. But I'm speculating here. I just can't recall. As
far as you're aware, was the Post Office restricting the terms of the investigation?
So, because my understanding also always has been that the role of Second Sight was to focus on the cases in the scheme, then the answer to that is no. And I think I say in my statement that there is clearly, and it became apparent throughout the process, that there were differing views on the role of Second Sight, but I can't recall that Post Office's view ever changed, and I'm not sure that any of the original documentation suggested that Second Sight's role was wider than the cases in the scheme itself. I haven't subsequently gone back and checked, so I could be wrong in that.
Could we have on screen, please, POL 30298813? This is an email dated the 1st of February 2015 from Roderick Williams to you and other Post Office employees. He explains that he is providing his comments on the difficult questions, brackets, boxes document, and the subject line in the email is narrative boxes, RW comments on the difficult questions, boxes document. Can you help, first of all, with what the difficult questions, boxes document was? I
don't know, But looking at the timing, this may have been to do with the questions and answers that were being drafted for Paula for her appearance before the Select Committee. But that is just from looking at the timing, that's the only thing I could think it might be.
On page 2 of this document, point 8, there is a section on second sight. Mm-hmm. And at the third bullet point here, there is this: re-fettering, in quote marks, SS independence / challenging SS's findings. This demonstrates their independence. Second sight make findings and recommendations, not, in capitals, decisions. Post Office has always retained that power. Did you agree with Mr. Williams' comments in relation to this? That Post Office has always had the power of decision?
So it's difficult to answer in the abstract because I don't know the contents of the boxes. But I don't know that Second Sight had any decision-making power in relation to the working group or the cases. Does that answer your question?
It does. And in relation to the reference to fettering, which is in quote marks then, can you help at all with where that comes from? It may be that you can't if you don't have the underlying.
I can't, apart from to say that I think it was a term, so I don't think I introduced the term, but I think it's like many of the terms that we use. It was sort of shorthand for, is Post Office trying to control second sites? But again, I'm trying to answer in the abstract here, and I don't think I can do that helpfully.
I'd like to turn, please, to your involvement in the substance of complaints in the scheme, or absence of involvement. You say at paragraph 30, apologies, that document can come down before we turn to the new topic. You say at paragraph 33 of your statement, and would you like to look at that? That's
please, yes.
Page 17 of the statement, please, paragraph 33. You say here, nevertheless, whilst investigations into complaints contained in scheme applications technically fell within the scheme, I was not responsible for the substance of those investigations. Angela was responsible for this work because of her particular expertise and experience in Horizon and the way the system worked, and she managed the investigation team. My involvement in investigations was limited to chasing the progress of those investigations, along with progress of Second Sight's reviews of the investigations, in order to effectively manage the progress of applications within the scheme. Could we have on screen, please, with that in mind, POL 30-99694. This is an email chain from October 2013, so very early on. And the original email in this chain is from Ron Warmington to Paula Venables, and it starts at the bottom of page 1. We can see the subject is example applications there. To Paula Venables, copied to Angela Vanden Bogard. And he's sending there 8 examples of the incoming applications presumably incoming applications for the scheme.
I assume so.
Going then to the middle of page 1. We can see Paula Venables forwards Mr. Warmington's email onto Martin Edwards, you and Mark Davies. And she says this in her covering email. So this is Wednesday, the 2nd of October. Dear all, I'm not sure who else I want to read these yet, but certainly the three of you. They make disturbing reading. Brackets, I couldn't make sense of the spreadsheet, but the individual submissions are sufficient to get a steer on what we are dealing with. We have to keep it in perspective, of course, but even in perspective, they are challenging from all sorts of angles. Brackets, Belinda, these are examples of Sparrow cases that have been submitted for consideration for mediation. I'm with Angela tomorrow at AM. She and her team are hopefully going to talk me through where we have made improvements and where we still need to do more. I am glad I've decided to make the trip. We need to show we are taking this very seriously. Was Miss Venables seeking your views on the substance of these complaints by this email?
I can't imagine that she would have been. So, looking at the timing of this, I think my involvement in the scheme had not been announced. I'm certain it wouldn't have been. I'm as certain as I can be, because I think that was the following week, 8th of October. But I think she was just giving me some information in relation to the scheme that I was going to be involved in. I don't think she had any expectation that I would be either commenting on or involved in the detail. What I would say is, I think this is the email I referred to earlier, where I asked to see a copy of the report.
If we can go up and have a look at that now. So your response is at the top. And this is the 3rd of October from you to Paula Venables, Martin Edwards, Mark Davies. Thanks, Paula. Not easy to read on BlackBerry, but I see your point from what I can see. I have not seen the second site report. Would someone be able to send me a copy? I hope to catch up with Angela after you have seen her today. So this is, as you said, at an early stage, but can you recall why you saw her point that the information sent had made for disturbing reading?
No. I'm afraid I can't.
Did you get a sense at this stage of what it was that Post Office Limited was dealing with?
I don't think so. And I don't remember what I discussed with Angela just subsequently. So I'm afraid no, I can't answer that question.
So it is nearly 1 o'clock, and I wonder if that's a convenient moment to break for lunch.
Yeah. Can you give me some idea of the timescale after lunch?
Yes, I probably have another 20 minutes at most, and then there will be some questions from call participants. I will get an indication over the lunch period as to how long they will be, sir.
Thank you very much. So 2 o'clock?
Yes, please, sir.